Hello, hello, everybody. Been a couple of days. Welcome back to Mythos Mondays. I am might be might be a bit of a shorter stream tonight. I know we're starting a bit later than usual, but this is not a holy night. What the well, not yet. It's not. I mean, not. Did did Little Christmas happen already? I think Little Christmas happened already. I think that's like the 6th. I don't remember. What's Little Christmas? Little Christmas is the. You know how people talk about the 12 days of Christmas? The 12 days of Christmas actually start on Christmas Day. Christmas Day is the first day of Christmas. Three Kings. Yeah, Three Kings Day is Little Christmas. Yeah. Yeah. The day that the three kings arrived at the what do they call it? The manger. The the thing. This the place. Anyway, check out what I can do. Not gonna lie, this is how I realized today's Monday. Epic. I'm become a household name. See, that's what I want. That's Mythos Monday. It's a staple. So I still have my tree up, and I'm not. It's a year-long tree. It's a year-round. You gotta water it constantly. It's going to die anyway. It is a multi-holiday, non-denominational tree in my house. It's simply my house tree. It's my house tree. That's what it is. You know, people have house plants. This is my house tree. All right. So, I wanted to get started at 3 p.m., but I had some stuff come up a little, like, I had some mid-afternoon stuff that I had to take care of, so I wasn't able to start until now. Um, so I'm gonna try and run. I'm gonna try and run till 9. Give it a good 3 hours, but my throat, and my voice is a little icky today, so I'm not confident. Um, because Mythos Mondays we're doing just reading. So if I have to call it a little early, maybe I'll call it a little early. If we only get through like one chapter or something, we'll play it by ear. I'm not super worried about it. I'm pretty confident I'll be able to make our regular stream time of 3-ish hours. But yeah, I might have to call it a little early. We'll see. Tomorrow we're gonna get back to Okami, and then on Wednesday I want to try and play uh, DMC Peak of Combat. Apparently they have an official emulator that I downloaded to play the game on PC instead of on your mobile phone, because fuck that. We're gonna see if it's any good. I wanna check that out. So look forward to that. In the meantime, let's get back to this. I might have to hold on. Good, yes, no, yes, and then whallapa! There we go. I'm in the corner, and I'm not clipping through anything, except like the bottom of my, but that's like the bottom, so it doesn't matter. All right. Nice, cozy reading. Night of the Witches 1. There are multiple witch nights? Is the witch on the multiple holy nights? I don't know. Let's find out. Sojiro returned to his apartment on foot as per routine, under a blanket of clouds in the night sky. The rusty stairs of his apartment building clanged with each step. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see the bicycles parked by the apartment building's outer wall. He debated the pros and cons of a bicycle, how much easier life would be versus the expense, the convenience versus the necessity, but in the end, decided one was not right for him just now. Clutching the bag of apples under his arm, he took out the keys to his residence. A bike sure would be convenient, but it's not like... He tilted his head in confusion. More and more he found himself preoccupied with such random thoughts, when the real issue at hand was deciding what to do with the apples he had received. He placed the paper bag by the sink and switched on the lights. It was just after 10 in the evening. With the end-of-term exams just around the corner, he had come home an hour earlier than usual. As he made back for the kitchen to pick one of the apples to snack on, he found an envelope stuffed in his mail slot. The envelope had no name, return address, or stamp. Inside was a single piece of paper that had only the sender's name and a short message. It read, "There's something we need to talk about tonight. It's important, so I'll be waiting. Needless to say, keep this a secret." A concise set of orders, neatly written. It was signed, Aoko Aozaki. She had been considerate enough to enclose a detailed map of the meeting place. Puzzled, he cocked his head to the side, then headed out the door. Afterward, upon the room's sole tenant leaving the premises, the envelope burst into flames and evaporated without a trace, as though it had never existed in the first place. By the late 80s, Japan's post-war economic boom had somewhat stabilized, and the city experienced a period of steady growth. The city's modernization marched on, and the Japan Railway's train station, a symbol of the new era, neared completion. In Misaki's neighboring town of Yashirogi, a new symbol of its own was about to be born. Yashirogi Bread and Kitsi Land. It was Misaki's worst investment. Years later, it would be dubbed the fool's gold of the economic bubble, a relic of a bygone age. The city lacks aspiration and sophistication. 10 years ago, Yashirogi's renowned Tokitsu Baking Company ran factories all across the nation. Its proprietor was a middle-aged gentleman, then aged 56, by the name of Yurihiko Tokitsu, known affectionately by most as Toppan. He took it upon himself to begin development on an estate on the outskirts of Yashirogi and broke ground on a recreational wonderland that he hoped to be the pride of Misaki City. The long-awaited opening came in 1981. After 3 years of investment, this local amusement park, full of all kinds of hopes and dreams, began its short-lived tenure. It covered more than 85 square acres. Its magnificent merry-go-round dazzled all who passed through the park's gates. Its roller coaster twisted and turned about the edges of the park like a writhing Japanese dragon. Its Ferris wheel, packed beyond necessity with gimmicks, was said to have tested the limits on modern engineering. It's perfect, infused with everything an amusement park could ever need. Old Yurihiko looked upon his creation and smiled. Only boosting his confidence was the fact that its grand opening was staged during a period of prosperity, the springtime of the world. But, in spite of this, they splendidly miscalculated the balance between aspirations and sophistication. Its mascot Kitsy was poorly designed and appeared like a cheap knockoff. The park was stuffed to the brim with bread stands. Even its impossible-to-navigate mirror maze seemed out of date from the start. There are no dreams to be had at Kitsyland, only nightmarish satire. Numerous trade magazines lambasted Kitsyland's shortcomings, and customer attendance declined. There was even an incident where a 6-year-old strayed from his mother, had an accident, and nearly died. 1986. 5 years after the park opened. The situation had grown from bad to worse, and the park was hemorrhaging money. On top of everything, Yurihiko, who had bet everything on the success of mascot Kitsy, retired, and Kitsyland's operations were officially in trouble. And thus, amidst the scorn of nearly all residents of the area, ended Misaki City's one and only amusement park. What's more, perhaps best described as a footnote to this debacle, the self-proclaimed Parisian artist who designed the mascot, Toki Julich, was said to have snapped his brush in mourning over the closure of the park. Returning to the present. It was midnight, and the Kitsyland of today was a shadow of its former glory. Like a doll abandoned in the corner of a toy box, the lonely park was illuminated only by the light of the town that continued to live around it. So that's what happened. Sojiro closed the Yashirogi guidebook that he had picked up on the way here. The story of its history was almost difficult to believe, but he supposed this was what people referred to as entropy. The park's front gate was unlocked. When you worked here the previous time, the iron fence was locked shut with a rusty chain, but the chain was nowhere to be seen, and the gate left ajar. Following the map drawn in the letter, Sojiro quickly made his way inside. It sounded urgent, but to meet this late at night, what in the world could she want? Sojiro complained, quite out of character for him. It was probably because, in spite of his naivete, even when he knew that something was amiss. Though the park was abandoned, this was still trespassing. Unlawful entry, larceny, burglary. These were certainly not things, or perhaps crimes, that Sojiro was proud to do, but... Sorry, I can't pay you any money. I'm really sorry for coming in for free. Money, apparently, was why his conscience was gnawing at him. He clapped his hands in apology toward the statue of Kitsy, on whose eyes the paint had begun to aptly dissolve. Sojiro passed the mascot bleeding red paint from its eye sockets and began to walk the night park. The building's colors had faded. The collection of machines was rusted. The man-made residents no longer felt the passage of time. Even the ghosts themselves could not endure the disparity between this forsaken place and its previous grand stature. It was like a fossilized dream. These were the ruins of a paradise, both created and abandoned by man and reality. The economy had stabilized, and the standard of living was on the rise. Nobody was overly concerned with the future. These were the remains of a wild and exciting era. His breath turning to white wisps before him, Sojiro continued through the abandoned amusement park. Though void of human presence, this was not nearly as frightening as the darkness deep in the mountains. City suburbs can take many forms, but Kitsyland was unusual for an amusement park, insomuch as it had been built adjacent to a residential district. The park was surrounded by a forest, but even that, ultimately, was man-made. It was no different from the curtains on a classroom window. If he were to scale the iron fence encircling Kitsyland and break through the 20 yards of afforested trees, he could make it back to the familiar townscape. Though the amusement park tended to arouse dread in the city folk, to Sojiro it was little different from the commotion and terror of downtown. I guess that's it. The central plaza was as silent as a grave. According to the map, the meeting spot was west of here. Waiting for Sojiro at his destination was a rugged, imposing, magnificent castle, towering before the backdrop of a cloudy night sky. Even for an abandoned park, it was a remarkable structure. If the roller coasters and the Ferris wheel were loud, intense attractions, this was a comparatively quiet and easygoing. It was one of Kitsyland's 3 iconic structures, and, in a way, the wicked fortress that guided this paradise down the path of closure. Generally speaking, amusement park mazes generally fell into one of 2 categories. Labyrinths, which disorient visitors with their sheer size, and mirror houses, which disorient visitors with optical illusions. Many of a labyrinth's guests enjoyed the brief sense of adventure that it afforded. Over the years, however, it would be usurped by the ever-increasing thrills of new attractions. Such was the way of all trends, the curse of fads. The new must give way to the newer. On the other hand, the House of Mirrors was a time-honored, beloved staple. Even within the confines of a classroom's dimensions, well-placed mirrors and well-directed light could both perplex and delight its visitors. And figuring in the cost of a maintenance as well as a well-designed house of mirrors could far outlive its labyrinth brethren. Even if both types faded into obscurity, they would remain a staple of what constituted an amusement park. However, that didn't mean that combining them would produce double the fun. Together they transformed from entertainment into an uncanny realm from which those who dared to step within could never leave. In a similar sense, Kitsy's Mystery Tour Castle was the park's very own otherworld. Indeed, 5% of visitors ended up requesting staff assistance to get out. Modeled after European castles, it was greater than a football field in length, and the interior was further split into 3 floors. 2 floors above ground and 1 below, lined with mirrors from top to bottom, equal parts complex and vast. The maze demanded at least 30 minutes even from veterans. One visit was all it took to be struck by a Wow. It's not often I encounter a word that I'm not immediately sure how to pronounce. This is a rarity for me. Catoptrophobia. One visit was all it took to be struck by catoptrophobia for hours. It was this labyrinth that now stood in Sojiro's way. It looks like it's not entirely pitch black. I guess somebody turned the lights on. It seemed that Sojiro, unaware of what a house of mirrors even was, concerned himself only with its lighting. He checked the letter from Aoko once more. The letter read, "I will be waiting in the first floor lobby of the House of Mirrors." That meeting place was definitely in here. There was something to see by it, at least, as he could just make out light faintly through the open doors. Putting aside his suspicions, he headed toward the entrance. The sound of his steps against the brick-laid path echoed faintly. He was far from the hustle and bustle of the city. The park's clocks no longer made tick nor talk, and the winter's bite no longer blew in the night. From within the silence, the stillness that would cause any onlooker to hold their breath. Hello? Sojiro stopped abruptly at the entrance to the House of Mirrors. By the way, why are you over there, Aozaki? He called out, turning back toward the plaza. A sound rang out as if someone had dove behind a garbage can, and it fell to the ground with their haste. A short silence ensued. For a moment, the abandoned park returned to its previous hush. Resigned to her having been exposed, the girl appeared from her hiding place. Those boots got me for a sec. His voice died in his throat as he took in the sight of the girl's familiar face in unfamiliar attire. This Aoko, with her long hair flowing in the breeze, was different from the Aoko that Sojiro knew. The resolute stance and posture she took exuded the strength of her will. She stared directly at him with a sharp-eyed, piercing gaze. Her eyes were glowing with a dim, phosphoric light, enough to give Sojiro pause that he might be hallucinating. An icy coldness and a girl's strength. Sojiro lacked a sense of danger, but the sense of imbalance caused even him to feel the malice in the air. It was as though the Yuki-onna spirit of folklore had climbed out from a ghost story and appeared here in reality. The Yuki-onna, the snow woman. Particularly apt comparison for an ice queen like Aoko. Aozaki? Instinctively, Sojiro took a step back. Surprised, he was starting to feel concerned. An unpleasant premonition rose to the surface, bringing with it a sense of anxiety. In spite of this, he felt obliged to honor urban etiquette by seeing if she was all right. Did something happen to you? From the looks of it, Without acknowledging him, Aoko took a step forward. Her figure, this atmosphere, Sojiro felt himself recalling a recent memory. His twisted and knotted apprehension melted away and was replaced with a growing realization. The girl before him was very similar to someone he had seen before, that night in the park, though he had only seen her from behind. With increasing certainty causing him to swallow nervously, he noted that they might as well have been identical. You asked me what I was doing. Well, it's exactly what it looks like. I was waiting for my prey to pass by. Once you went inside, I was going to follow and cut off your only route of escape. Aoko said, perturbed by the swift change in plans. So I came to the right place. Sojiro was mightily relieved he had not gone to the wrong place. It was unclear whether he felt confident about dealing with what was to come, or if he had simply failed to grasp the hopelessness of the situation. Aoko ignored his obtuse response and continued. You know, Shizuki, just like anyone else, some people get on my nerves, and some people I just really hate. But the funny thing is, my enemies are never people on my shit list. Cold emotion burned in her eyes. Her feet had already moved one step closer to Sojiro. Sojiro's sense of foreboding was growing stronger. Wondering if what he sensed was bloodlust, he retreated another step. Continuing as so, they maintained a distance of just 15 feet. As far as I can recall, I've never thought of someone I didn't like as an enemy. As it happens, I've even had enemies that I liked. And the reason is simple. She held her right arm out. The light about her was no illusion. It's simple, really. Anyone who throws me out of whack is my enemy. Her arm moved again. It was instantaneous. Something shot past Sojiro in the blink of an eye, missing him by just a foot to his left. Before his eyes, a blue light, something akin to a fireball, had ignited from nothing. He finally understood what was happening. Wait a second, I've seen one of those before. She ignored his dim-witted reaction. Damn it, I missed. Aoko muttered to herself. The fist-sized hole in the blue light had made in the House of Mirrors crackled and smoldered. A shot like that could easily cave in a human skull, in addition to burning it to a crisp. I'd have to kill myself if Alice saw me miss at this range. But you get it now, right? This is it for you. There won't be a second chance. Sojiro backed away swiftly. Things were beyond incomprehensible. He was close to losing the ability to think at all. All he could make out was the figure of the dependable student council president, or at least what he thought was the president, and the memories of the park that night 2 days ago. He had never experienced anything like this, though most people living in a civilized country would have never seen anything like it either. A lethal weapon that could kill him with nothing more than the pull of a finger, had a way of suspending the ability of its target to determine between not just good and evil, but dreams and reality, past and future. And the more peaceful someone's life had been, the stronger that suspension was like to be. All that one could think about was the fact that they were alive at that very moment. It was as if he was an unwritten character on a blank piece of white paper. There was no before, there was no after. There was only what came next. This was a very common thought process for anyone staring down the barrel of a gun. Oh, don't bother begging, it's pointless. But feel free to air your grievances. It's a killer's duty to listen to her victim's last words. By saying it was pointless, she made it sound more like she would not listen to what he had to say. However, Sojiro was in such a state of shock that it did not even enter his mind to speak up. All he knew, for reasons unknown, was that the girl in front of him wanted him dead. You could have told me, Tobimaru. You said that no such thing exists. Well, how about now, idiot? There's a monster right in front of me. Sojiro felt that if he had said that aloud, a second blast would come even quicker than the last, so he kept it to himself. His mental expletives stirred his mind from paralysis to mere panic. This response came not from confidence, however. Someday out of the blue, someone is going to kill me. While it may have seemed like a baseless belief to hold, but now that I think about it, murders happen all the time in cities. I should have remembered, if you break the rules you get killed. I knew that already. To Sojiro, the situation seemed to perfectly align with his inexperienced understanding that the city was a coldly pragmatic place. As far as he was concerned at this moment, being killed by a classmate was not something to be so surprised by. In a society where murder was possible, he was able to accept this sort of situation as natural, Of virtually no concern was the series of events that led to Aoko's aggression toward him. The only thing that truly confused him was Aoko's blue fireball. Sojiro swallowed with an audible gulp. To anyone who may have been watching, it was the response of a victim paralyzed by fear. That's right. So you do finally get it. I'm all out of words, so I think it's time you died. I could go on about how magecraft has to stay hidden, but that doesn't really have anything to do with you. All you need to know is that you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that it was me who killed you. Done talking, Aoko once again lifted her right arm. There was a hum like a machine. Blue light began to revolve about her arm beneath her sleeve. This was taking longer than last time, leading Sojiro to believe that it was going to be much stronger than the attack that was still scorching the wall behind him. The realization caused his panic to heighten. No, wait. It's not about me having to die, or the fact that the monster that night was actually Aozaki, or even whether she's a part of the church. It's not about any of that. His thoughts became jumbled. His heart pounded like a hammer. This was no time to be standing still. He was not sure if the girl in front of him was really human, and more importantly, even if he could accept the events unfolding before him, when all was said and done. Wait, it's wrong to kill people. Even if it was a fact of life in the city, Sojiro was not about to lie down and die. Don't you think I know that? Hey, wait! Sojiro's scream, still entirely oblivious, was just the thing to invoke Aoko's full wrath. Aoko fired a barrage of magical blue bullets. In an instant, Sojiro dashed into the shadows behind him, into the entrance to the House of Mirrors. What the heck was that? He darted feverishly down the hall. After a mere few feet, he was left completely out of breath. This was due to his shock at seeing yet another attack, fiercer than the first, that he'd never seen in his life. And because he couldn't shake the thought that if he had moved even a second later, he would be dead. He could not afford to stop. The sound of merciless footsteps closed in behind him. I bought myself some time. Maybe here I'll be able to figure out something. He threw everything into his legs as he sprinted. A straight, narrow passage, about 60 feet long, connected the entrance to the main lobby. At this rate, if he could just make it to the lobby, he was sure he would be able to find as many hiding spots as he needed. Thank God. He arrived in a large, open space. This was the first floor lobby. There were 3 passageways. One led to the basement floor. One connected to the first floor maze. The other was a set of stairs leading to the second floor. Sojiro did not particularly care which one he chose, so, trusting his intuition, he made a run for the first floor maze, when he smacked his head into a transparent wall. A mirror. That's right. It's annoying, but I guess this makes things fair. The chaser and the chased are on equal ground. A somehow cheerful voice echoed in his direction. There was no need for Sojiro to even turn around. In the very same mirror he had crashed into, he could see Aoko Aozaki's figure slowly approaching. You should know, I sealed off the first floor exit deeper inside. Physically, not with a bounded field. You can actually, I don't want to tab back in the, but you can see her. You can see her over there. I was kind of hiding her. I don't want to get in the way of that. Is calling it a seal going too far? Maybe plugged or buried works. Either way, if you get too close, you'll be swallowed by a cave-in. I recommend keeping your distance if you don't want to be buried alive. Panicked by the impending footsteps, Sojiro groped for the wall. He could see the stairs to the second floor. He did not understand what Aoko had meant earlier, but he at least knew that the first floor was not going to save him. It would save me a lot of trouble if you just died that way, though. The cleanup is much easier for accidental deaths. Behind him was a creature beyond words. As she continued her idle taunting, she lifted her right arm ostentatiously. Even from above her clothes, one could see some kind of strange, incongruous pattern upon her body. The veins beneath her skin. They made it seem as though something inhuman was circulating her body. Whether out of pity or repulsion, Sojiro stopped for just a moment. His pursuer evaded his gaze. You've noticed, then. I normally hide it with ointment, but today is special. It's called a magical crest. It's proof that I'm a mage. You see this light revolving around me, right? It's the beginning of what formed that snap, those bullets. I'm feeling pretty good today, and I've never felt more confident in how to use my magical energy efficiently. I think I'm good for another 30 bullets or so. Perhaps she was on an emotional high, for her voice had become frightfully friendly. The substance of the conversation could not have been any more unsettling, however. I don't understand a thing you're saying, Ozaki. You don't? I'm telling you that I have 30 more shots in the tank. If you can escape before I use them up, it's your win. For today, that is. For today? You mean I have to do this tomorrow, too? Sojiro knit his brows. Aoko's expression creased into a scowl at his behavior. Although he was panicking, it seemed that deep down he still did not feel the full weight of the crisis. She knew he still didn't get it. I said my piece. Free time is over. I may still have some trash talk left in me, but, well, there's never enough time to get it all off my chest anyway. Just give up already. It appeared Aoko had prepared this theatrical dialogue ahead of time. Not to allow her opponent time for futile pleading, but to give him the time to curse her, his killer. Such forthrightness was her modus operandi. With this victim, however, it was not going as she had hoped. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Shall we begin the hunt? Her voice was void of emotion, and her eyes ruthless as they bored into her prey. This time, Sojiro finally accepted that he was going to die. Silent as the dead, it stepped into the remnants of a dream that had long since seen no visitors. There was no wind this night, nor a soul to be seen. Still it heard the echoes from within, clasped its hands together, and grinned. Its form, with hands clasped, resembled that of a budding tulip. The bearing of this artificial flower reflected in the cloudy mirror of the ticket attendant's office next to the gate. Next to it stood a display board corroded by years upon years of rust. Number of visitors today, 2. Number of today. The board had graffiti crudely scrawled atop one of the words. It was replaced with deaths. The records board had long ago fallen to disrepair. After taking a full 10 seconds to digest what it was looking at, it made its own revision. Number of visitors today, 3. Number of deaths today, 1. After appending this number with an index finger, she smiled like a flower. Then she began to walk toward the source of the sound. It had been 10 minutes since this rhapsody had begun to echo from the House of Mirrors. The amusement park's entrance returned to as it was before, soulless. In the end, even if Sojiro had been the luckiest man alive, there was no way he should have been able to escape. The question, however, was how much of this was by design, and how much was sheer coincidence. Even Aoko, who had made all the arrangements, had no answer. Indeed, there were only 3 things she could say. It was taking longer than expected. He was putting up more resistance than she had anticipated, and that choosing the House of Mirrors had been a mistake. She had really screwed the pooch on this one. The location itself was an excellent choice, as the House of Mirrors was perfect as a hunting ground, but seeing her own incompetence reflected in the mirrors was beginning to grate on her. The moment Aoko's right arm began to glow, Sojiro made a beeline for the staircase in front of him. A strobing series of blue flashes lit the room behind him. The hunter calmly followed her prey, and the prey desperately ran for his life up the stairs. Just what the doctor ordered. We can't very well let the best laid plans go to waste now, can we? In stark contrast to Sojiro's frenzied escape, Aoko walked briskly up the stairs. She elected not to run after her prey in order to maintain a set distance. As she lacked confidence in her accuracy, she would be the most challenged if Sojiro bull-rushed her and went down fighting. But at a distance of 30 or so feet, he posed no threat. By the time her prey drew near, she could fire 10 shots and hit with at least 4 of them. Their positioning just a moment ago hadn't been ideal. At this distance, in a space this open, there was a chance, however small, that it could turn into a fistfight if he flanked and charged her. Currently, Aoko's best weapon was the bullets from her right arm. If she was going to capitalize on that advantage, it was in her best interest not to close the gap between them. If there was a good time to approach, it was only after her prey had become exhausted and had lost the will to continue. Would she pierce his leg, shoot him in the back, or perhaps would he just give up after losing himself in the labyrinth? The hunt would end when her target sustained some sort of injury and became unable to run. On Sojiro's end, he could barely bite back on screaming as he bolted through the maze. Even running in a straight line had become difficult, much less searching for an exit. The corridor stretched out far before him, or so the mirrors blocking the path had made it seem. Panicked, he made a turn to the right. That hurt. Clutching his head in his right arm, Sojiro led with his left, groping through the air to see whether a wall was there or not. He dove down the hall to the left, narrowly dodging the bullets targeting his life. Urged on by the sound of approaching footsteps, he ran without thinking. That last one was close. A hair closer would have meant his life. He caught the odor of burnt hair from the back of his neck. He was very lucky. Or perhaps very unlucky. If he were actually lucky, he would not be in this situation in the first place. The second floor of the House of Mirrors was structured like a giant spiral. It wound left, starting from the outside wall. Eventually, it would lead to a dead end. The more he tried to escape, the more concerned he would become, the more cornered he would become, as though he were trapped in a twisted guillotine. His stifled screams threatened to leak out as complaints. No matter what he did, he was going to be killed. All of his struggling merely served to prolong the inevitable. Yet he ran. No matter how many mirrored walls he rammed himself into, he ran. Even after crashing so hard that his forehead bled and he saw stars, he ran. Pain shot through him at every turn. The more frantically he ran, the more intensely he smashed into the invisible walls. His body began to understand this rule and begged him not to run anymore. His breath was already ragged after sprinting a couple 100 feet. No matter how he thought about it, this was not normal. This was way too crazy. This was all just a bad joke. If he turned around now, she would apologize to him for taking it too far. His mind had gone blank, as his body continued to slam into the mirrors again and again. His feet slowed as they began to believe that perhaps it really was all a joke. But then he felt a chill, a touch of death upon his neck. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Sojiro knew this kind of terrible chill far too well. Ever since he had arrived in the city, he had come face to face with more than one or two near-death experiences. For someone who did not understand city life, his present predicament was not unlike when he experienced the traffic on the streets or the commuter rush on the station platform. He was far from an innocent babe, unable to comprehend life or fear. Rather, everything he had ever known became irrelevant when he was flung into a completely different cultural sphere. Even society's promises of safety, something urbanites took for granted, were threats unknown. So, he was used to this already, though if he were to be honest, he was dissatisfied with some things. Things superfluous to necessity. This world was overflowing with valueless things, and they were all dangerous in some way. Even the everyday necessities sold at the convenience store were, as far as he was concerned, amazing tools. Civilization had raised the standard of living so high that it had numbed humanity's sense of danger. The city's constant pursuit of wealth and convenience was a poison to a country boy like Sojiro. Did he die? Do people die when they are killed? He did say something that reminded me of that. He said it's wrong to kill people, and I instantly thought people die when they are killed. Sojiro is just Shiro. We're witnessing the archetypes, the prototypes that beget the archetypes. And he did not have the capacity to accept these conveniences. That it was possible for such conveniences to easily and suddenly be misused and cause unintended accidents had always made him anxious. Why? He had to wonder why he was even here. Ah, how ironic. It took the real threat of death to finally make him realize, like a divine revelation, what he'd failed to understand until now. He always had to expect the unexpected. Near-death experiences were more common than one might think. To begin with, safety was something that came at a price. Being alive meant that the opposite was always lurking around the corner. It was just like a streetlight at night. When the sun rose, its illumination would naturally disappear. Another barrage of strange projectiles whizzed mercilessly by him. He recalled in the back of his mind the charred remains of someone at the hands of that blue flame 2 nights prior. Somehow this situation reminded him of a horse being led by a dangling carrot. For now, he lifted his head and continued to run through the labyrinth. But for what purpose? Though he knew the pain in his chest was very real, he felt disconnected from it. The night sky visible through the skylight was a muddy ultramarine, no longer resembling the one he knew. And managed to calm himself. Sojiro began to laugh in despair as though something rather precious had been broken. Everything had become meaningless anyway. Even so, his legs somehow made their way forward at the sight of her reflection in the mirror. Like a game of cat and mouse, Sojiro fled through the labyrinth of mirrors. Then, after 4 minutes, that strangely unreal tension ended. The 9th shot of blue light hit inches away from him. It exploded the moment it made impact, launching Sojiro into the opposite wall. Of all the fire he had taken thus far, this shot indisputably brought him the closest to death. The archer class really is made up of archers. Except for when it's not. Groaning, he collapsed to the floor. His back was on fire with pain. He was not bleeding, and was lucky he could still even scream. Yet his body refused to move. Physically and mentally, he still had something to spare. The pain was not so bad that he couldn't get back up. It was just that there was a skylight above him, and he could glimpse the dark night of the night sky beyond. The feeling that overcame him was a raw, selfish bout of grief. Oh, it was just so cruel. To have to stare at that for the remainder of what short life he had left. Sojiro's ragged breath slowed. For all intents and purposes, he had given up. He had given up fleeing from the pursuing footsteps, and perhaps even the root of all his problems. Well, at least it was Aozaki who got to kill me. Sojiro Shizuki felt things that in any other circumstance he would never feel. Incidentally, without exaggeration or embellishment, this was the only mistake he had ever made in his entire life. Staring vacantly into the night sky above, Sojiro listened as the footsteps drew nearer.
Give up?
You give up? It was the closest her voice had ever been to him. Perhaps feeling that he really had given up, she approached his collapsed form. In the dark, mirror-lined corridor, he could not make out her expression. Without a word, Sojiro raised his eyes to meet his murderer. I suppose if you don't care, you don't have to ask. You really do throw me off. Most people would ask me why I'm going to kill them right about now. Aoko spoke from within the shadows. His eyes widened in bewilderment. Now that she had mentioned it, he realized that would have been the obvious question to ask. He had more or less picked up on the fact that he was being killed for learning some secret, but it was human nature to want to know more. That makes sense, now that you mention it. A simple affirmation. His face was a mixture of resignation and a forlorn longing. He thought for a moment before
でも言う必要はない。
But you don't have to say anything.
聞きたくないんだ。
I don't want to hear it. He responded in a mature, subdued voice. His response was clear, rather gallantly so.
So?
I see.
じゃ、殺すけど。
I'm still going to kill you.
死ぬの。
Aren't you scared of dying?
怖いに決まってる。
Of course I'm scared.
何より痛
It'll
そう。
probably hurt. His face turned wry as he objected, to which Aoko frowned. Nonchalant as he could be, he was honest about his feelings.
そりゃ怖いでしょ。
Of course that would be scary. I'd be scared too, you know.
でも悪いわね。
Sorry, though. You'll just need to deal with it.
人でなしと罵ってくれて結構。
It's okay if you call me a monster.
今の
That's exactly what I am right
本当に
now.
その通りだから。そういった意味じゃ。
I guess in that way, I'm just like you.
普通の道徳がないのよ。
I don't have what you would call normal
必
morals.
要なら人も殺せる。
Helps when I need to murder someone. Sojuro's finger twitched in response to her indifferent tone. As if to say that despite having given up on just about everything, his body could not let those words slide.
人殺しなんて。
Murder is wrong, you know.
分かってるって言ってるで
We
しょ。
went through this, I know that already. Aoko raised her right hand. The light from the crest illuminated her face. It goes without saying that her expression was unchanged. She was not crying, nor was she smiling. She was a young woman who had excised her feelings. Deal with it was another thing Sojiro could not let slide. Sojiro could read on Aoko's face that she was not herself. She was in pain, and to a degree he had never seen in her.
すまない。ちょっといいかな。
Sorry, but I guess I do have something to say.
何？
What is it? But don't think you can trick me into letting you go by making me feel bad. He unconsciously smiled at Aoko's ruthless counter and breathed a sigh of relief. He had misread the pain he saw in her face. This was the same Aoko. Sojiro laughed out loud in genuine joy, a laugh that most other people would have taken as an insult. I'm starting to regret letting you say your piece. Or should I take that attempt to make fun of me? Or should I take that attempt to make fun of me as just that?
いや、そうじゃなくて。
No, I'm not laughing at you.
そこにいる人は。
I was just wondering if that person over there was a friend of yours, Saozaki. Out of nowhere, Sojiro pointed behind Aoko.
Huh?
What? Aoko thought that it must have been that old, overused distraction technique. If this had been a Japanese comedy act, this would be the part where she gave him a whack with a paper fan. But after giving it a second thought, she realized Sojiro didn't have the capacity for understanding old or even new tricks.
あんた、何言って。
What are you... Perhaps his honest disposition had been to his benefit. Without thinking, Aoko gave in to her curiosity and turned her gaze toward the direction in which his finger was pointed. And there. Something that should not have been there in the maze. Something with a creaking, wooden smile. It was the ominous, creepy, uncanny figure of a girl. Looks like Ryder. Oh, yeah, that looks like Ryder. I guess I was right. A puppet. An unusual figure with 2 arms and 2 legs stood silently in the darkness. If only for a moment, its beauty, which was even apparent from afar, dulled the insanity of the current situation. Extend, extend, extend. The utterly unknown threat made Aoko freeze on the spot. Avoiding it didn't even occur to her. Humans process intelligence and knowledge, but when confronted with the unknown, they fail to process what to do, and... A shriek escaped Aoko's mouth. The magical attack crossed the 30-foot gap in an instant. The arm of the girl who had appeared at the rear of the corridor was slender and quick. It extended to a near impossible length, striking Aoko from behind. Aoko crashed into the wall as she fought back an anguished whimper. The attacker retracted her arm. Sojiro sprang to his feet. He darted to her side and used all the strength he could muster to get her to her feet. He could not believe how light she was. In Sojiro's mind, Aoko was an extraordinary individual. He'd expected that if he were to ever touch her, it would be apparent she was far stronger than he. But in reality, she felt about as heavy as you would expect from a 100-pound girl to feel. About 100 pounds, maybe. That's a little... It's just a little strange, that sentence. Meanwhile, that thing continued to reel in its arm as if it were some sort of mechanism. Having extended more than 30 feet from the elbow joint, it clanked as it returned to its previous shape and size. Are you okay? Are you for real? How can you even look at me like that right now? Aoko tore her hand away from Sojiro's. Suddenly, she felt her knees buckle from under her, but Sojiro caught her before she could hit the ground and helped her to her feet. Don't push yourself too hard. So, do you know this thing? He looked back at the eerie shadow 30 feet away as it finished retracting its arm. Yeah, I fought one of its friends a while back. Aoko grabbed her lower back as she answered. A searing pain shot through her. It's just a bruise. How can it hurt this much? It could have killed me, catching me off guard like that. Or maybe it can't kill from that distance. No, that can't be it. I must be missing something. Aoko tried to steady her breathing as she assessed the damage done to her back. The pain was quick to fade, and her breathing returned to normal. For the time being, her motor functions were no longer hindered, which meant the real damage was elsewhere. Aozaki, you're... I know, just shut up already. Blue light glowed across the gloom. The magical energy generated by her breathing was accumulating in her right arm. If magical energy was the fuel, the formula was the igniter. For Aoko, this was little more than a reenactment of 2 evenings ago. Next time the puppet extended its arm, Aoko would fire a magic bullet as fast as she could. A battle at approximately 30 feet. As long as Aoko could secure a 2-second window, she could create a counterattack to end their duel. It made its move. With its head tilted down, there was no expression to be seen, and in the darkness its apparent age was impossible to make out. To the 2 humans, the puppet was not dissimilar to a faceless ghost. Its left arm slowly came up with a grinding sound. Its movements were dull, as if the joints were rusty. The right arm, which had been extended earlier, hung at its side. Though the puppet's mouth was hidden by its long locks, the sense was that it was smiling. It's changing it up. It's attacking from the left. Move it, Shizuki. She threw herself into Sojiro and extended her right hand. Its arm extended at that very moment. The timing was impeccable. In a single second, Aoko's snap bullet scored a direct hit on the puppet's arm, throwing off its trajectory and sending it crashing into the puppet's body with a violent explosion. Or at least that's what would have happened had the magic formula been invoked. She barely avoided being struck once again. When her magecraft failed, her intuition took over, and she just managed to get away.
やられた。最
She
初は
got
そ
me.
ういうことか。
She knew what I was going to do. She clenched her teeth in frustration, her thoughts racing a mile a minute. Fight or flight? It only had one arm left, which would take time to retract. This was the best shot Aoko had at defeating it. If she could evade the right arm just a fraction, she could get close enough to...
Vivo in sum, solitare futurist universe. Ictius meus obitus dies, et meus nativus dies. Teobeam.
In slumber I live, in dirt I rot alone. Today is the day I died and was born. I come to you. A crackle echoed through the corridor. The poetic murmurs contained enough magical energy for a mage to perceive. The verse itself was Latin, but it contained hints of the language of curses. Gander. Originally, they were words meant to curse a hated adversary. However,
Mea animae mortalis, otem me futura negata sunt. Manes sum, animam definire ambiguum est. Teodi et am, conveniamus insomnio ipsum.
my life is immortal, though my future was destroyed. I am a ghost. The definition of life is ethereal. I hate you, and I love you. Let us meet in a dream. The puppet was directing the words at itself. Curses beget curses. The victim calls down a curse on the assailant, creating a vicious cycle of negativity. The incantation was meant to do just that. However, this was ultimately a one-puppet show. An unprecedented source of power akin to auto-intoxication. As unbelievable as it seemed, the cycle of curses had been turned into a perpetual motion device.
何それ、レベル高すぎじゃない。
You gotta be kidding me. Isn't this overkill? Aoko abandoned the idea of digging her heels in. It was time to flee with all due haste.
何してんの。あんたも来る。
What do you think you're doing? Come on! She grabbed Sojiro's hand and ran as fast as she could, deeper into the realm of mirrors. The crackling voice continued its murmuring behind them.
Proxime mich negligentes ferunt. Omnes nos peccantes fins. Et omnes nos edem fins. Omnes nos peccatores suns. Venit domum meum. Lut simile somnium. Et pulvere simile quotidianum. Corprebo.
My neighbors neglected me. Not an innocent among us. We are all sinners. We are all sinners. Welcome to my house. May we die a muddy death. From dust to dust. Gouge out my heart. Among Us. Not an innocent among us. Anyway, I'm I'm glad that you apologize.
Teudico.
Death be upon you. Aoko fought against the pain in her back as she ran through the mirrored corridor. She dragged Sojiro by the hand.
青崎、傷は
Aozaki, are you okay?
別に。
My spine is numb, but it could be worse. My internal organs seem fine, and I don't think I'm bleeding internally. She cursed inwardly at how much of a mess she felt, though. Unlike Sojiro, Aoko did not run into any transparent walls. Thanks not to superior sight, but rather preparation. She'd hammered the layout of the building into her memory.
平気って。
You're really okay? How can you tell? Because it's my body. One of the first things a mage learns is how to keep track of your body. Aoko's matter-of-fact answer contrasted with Sojiro's nervous questioning. The corridor grew shorter with each and every left turn. At first, they were able to advance in a straight line for about 100 feet at a time. But by now they were forced to turn a corner every 50 feet or so. Is that the one from the other night? Probably the same pattern, at least. Whoever's behind it must be pretty wealthy to be throwing a valuable automaton around like it's a toy. Sojiro furrowed his brows. He was grateful that she was answering his questions, but baffled by the strange words she was using. Hold up, Aozaki. We've been running for a long time. We're a good corner ahead of it. We can afford to rest a moment. His words suggested that he was still concerned about her injuries. Aoko shook her head in irritation. Not enough against something with that kind of range. We need to keep running until we're 2 or 3 turns clear at least. Sojiro nodded. With that matter settled, he asked, "Why didn't you leave me behind?" "Why do you think? So you couldn't get away, idiot." Answering curtly, Aoko glared at her naive prey. The two of them headed for the next corner. Their legs began to slow as they rounded one more. Aoko rubbed her back as she tried to catch her breath. Though Aoko had insisted that she was fine, it appeared to have been bravado. Even the usually clueless Sojiro felt the desperation they were in. He stood behind Aoko with his arms folded. While they had a moment, he tried to make sense of everything. First, Aoko had nearly killed him. Though he was saved at the last possible second, it was by the strange, stretchy woman Aoko had burned to ashes 2 nights prior. He could barely make it out that night, but he considered it a her, because it looked female. The woman's attack wounded Aoko's back and forced her to flee. Aoko had taken Sojiro with her, claiming that the reason she did so was to prevent her prey from escaping. In other words, you haven't given up, have you, Aozaki? Of course not. Even if I had to face 2 of those things, I'd still have plenty left to take care of the likes of you. Her tone was sharp, but even Sojiro could see that she was struggling to stay confident. The damage to her body was too much to afford her any optimism. Still, the fury in her eyes refused to accept her circumstances. My magic circuits are shorting out like crazy, which means that right arm of hers must be jamming my spells. Though the proper response would have been for her to tremble in fear, she did nothing but shake her fists in anger. The disruption of formulae was only supposed to work on absolute beginners. If it had been her roommate, the arm would have been repelled the instant it hit her, and the attacker's circuits burned out rather than her own. Attempting to establish a link to the magic circuits of another mage was like presenting your heart on a silver platter. It would be of no use in a battle against a superior mage. And yet her adversary had been designed to do just that. Coupled with the attacks on areas of Misaki under Aoko's jurisdiction these last few weeks, it was a clear statement from the enemy, who had revealed itself as a fellow mage 2 days ago. In other words, the puppets saw Aoko as no threat at all. Played right into their hands, huh? While she was still angry, the whirlwind of emotions within her started to fade. Her face was that of a hunter far beyond her years. You seem to be more concerned about this thing than you were about hunting me. Well, naturally. I was only playing with you. Sojiro was not sure whether to be happy or sad at that. This is all so confusing that I don't even know where to start.
一つだけいいか
But can I ask just one question? Aoko didn't respond. Her eyes were focused on the darkness before them. The silence was heavy, and the darkness was like a noose closing in on them. But Sojiro continued in spite of her indifference.
青崎は
Are you going to kill her too, Aozaki? A stillness fell over them. It was as if the gloom was pulling them in. No response. Their breathing was the only sound echoing from the dim corridor. There stood Sojiro, forcing her to confront her sins, and the magician girl who continued to ignore him. They spent a few seconds, seemingly frozen in time.
そう
Yes,
それがあなたのキーワードみたい
that's a sticking point for you, isn't it? Aoko whispered in a lifeless tone. Her sigh was tinged with both resignation and contempt.
キ
A sticky... what?
独り言よ
Nothing, forget it.
それと言っとくけど
But just so you know, that thing that's following us isn't human.
信じられないだろう
You might not believe this, but it's a puppet that can move of its own will,
この前の
just like the one from the other night. I'm not sure why Aoko would assume that he would believe it's human. It just reached its arm 30 feet down the hallway. Like, it's clearly, even if he doesn't know, like, machines, it's clearly mechanical. Sojiro nodded as he processed the information. Not only did he not doubt her story, but he seemed to have accepted it at face value.
なんか落ち着いてるわねあなた
You're awfully calm.
まさか
No way.
もう何が何
I
だ
have
か
no
わから
idea
ない
what's
から
going on, so
あまり
I'm
考えない
just
ふり
trying not
して
to
る
think
け
too
ど
hard about it.
ただ人形
The
に
part
関
about
し
it
て
being a
は
puppet isn't too
どうという
surprising
こと
to me,
だ
though.
もしかして
What?
他で
Are
も
you
自
saying
分
you've
人
seen
形を
one
見たことあ
before?
るとか
都会の
What do you
人形
mean?
って
Aren't all
こういう
puppets in
もの
this
じゃない
city like that? Yeah, me too. She barely stopped herself from falling to her knees. Of course, how could she have forgotten? She was dealing with a bona fide, natural-born moron. As a student who transferred from the isolation of the mountains like an endangered species, his utter lack of common sense rendering anything miraculous as mundane. If automobiles were moving hunks of metal, then moving puppets were nothing to write home about. Wait, that meant... To him, the incident from the other night hadn't been extraordinary at all. He might have even assumed it was an everyday occurrence in the city.
参った
I give up. You know, I'd really like to get a look inside your head someday.
ここまで来ると
I
感
honestly
心
have
する
no
わ
idea how you made it this far in life.
調子が狂うのも当然だ
No
った
wonder you're such a weirdo. Normally, people wouldn't react the way you did when I attacked you.
もっと違う反応をするはずなのに化け物とかお化
I
け
could
と
have
か
been a monster or a ghost,
でも
but
あな
for
たに
you,
と
it
って
was
は
just another
そう
new
いうこ
fact
と
of
もあ
life.
るで済まされてたわけなんだなんかバカみたいね私
I'm starting to feel like the real moron here. Her strained face returned to normal for a moment. It hit her. There had been another way to handle this without anyone getting hurt. But the damage had already been done. There were no do-overs in life, nor should there be. Her own mistaken assumptions had sent that situation spiraling out of control. But now that Sojiro was involved, she had to make sure that her secret was safe with him. Even if there had been another, better option, that ship had sailed. Human relationships were ultimately driven by mutual misunderstandings. They were like tapestries woven from mismatched intentions. Poetry. Break time was over. There stood Aoko Aozaki and Sojiro Shizuki. Their first ever idle conversation had come to an end. Not that they had a choice in the matter. It was the jarring murmuring from around the corner that cut it short.
Initio eraberamos dum brevimus dolores sunt. Nem adiuvat.
Nobody remembers my funeral. My mourners have long since perished. We were born wrong. Life is suffering. Somebody save me. The enemy was just around the corner, visible in the mirrors parallel to it.
悠長に話してる場合じゃないわ。
We don't have time for this. We need to keep our distance. In contrast to Aoko's elegant blues, its lights were malicious red.
感動打ち。
Gondor shots. There was a momentary flash of light before she even extended her arm. But the instant she saw the enemy, her dormant feelings erupted once more. You're a real pain in the ass. She channeled all of her pent-up anger and shunted it into her right arm. The fog that filled the corridor was no magical weaving, but rather a barrier of raw energy. It was equivalent to setting ablaze 3 buckets of gasoline to create a wall of fire, in the hope it would stop an arrow in flight. If the puppet had attacked with its arm, it could have pierced such a wall easily, but because it had loosed curses with no definite form, the wall of energy repelled the attack. While it was a huge waste of magical energy, it was the only means Aoko had to protect herself at that very moment. Unfortunately, its protection was reserved for Aoko alone. Sojiro held his hand to his mouth. While the curse had been weakened to the point where Aoko could no longer feel it, it had plenty of effect on Sojiro, who was not a mage. As if it understood this fact, the puppet turned its gaze from Aoko to the unanticipated human behind her.
こいつは関係
This has nothing to do with him. Enraged, she swung her arm forward once again. The blue light formed a wall to block the Gondor for a scant few seconds. It was enough of an opening to exploit. Just as Aoko was forming the wall, the puppet pointed its right arm at her face and...
関係あるみたいだから逃げるぞ。
This apparently does have something to do with me. Time to run. Before the rocket of death could be fired, Sojiro scooped her up into his arms. How he mustered the strength to do so was a mystery, but he turned his back on the puppet and took off running. He was a nimble sprinter, resembling a deer leaping across obstacles. Sojiro rounded 2 more corners, ignored whatever complaints Aoko was making, and eventually stopped in the middle of the 2nd floor. He set her down.
よし。ここまで来れば少しは休める。
All right, I bought us enough time to rest a bit. Sojiro's shoulders heaved as he caught his breath. As light as she was, running while carrying someone else would make anyone winded. She looked up at him with incomprehension.
こんな体力あったのに。
You had that much stamina all along? Then why? It made no sense to her. If he had the stamina to pick her up and run, surely he could have stood up and escaped when he had been downed earlier.
ああ。あの時は
Oh,
諦めてたから。
that time I'd given up. His words were unfiltered as ever. Though right then, fighting for their lives, he lacked some of his usual absent-mindedness.
諦めてたって。
But why?
さあ。
Who knows?
忘れた。そんな
I've forgotten already. Though he may have turned away because he regretted saying it aloud, his words spoke volumes. For some reason, it pained Aoko to see him like that.
それより青崎。
Also, Aozaki,
唐突に気分が
I'm
悪い
suddenly feeling really ill.
あの赤い光も
Was it that red light?
ええ。魔
Yes,
術の類よ。
a form of
ガンド
magecraft.
打ちって言って
They're called Gondor shots,
北欧の呪詛の
a curse that originated from
魔術
Scandinavia.
回路のある私
It
に
has no effect on someone with magic circuits like myself, but you're defenseless against it.
なんだ。青崎には聞こえ
I
ない
see, it doesn't work on you.
じゃあ。
Then that arm is the only thing that poses a threat. Aoko had no idea why he was relieved, but she gritted her teeth and fought down the urge to snap at him. There was no use in yelling at a time like this. Above all, she felt that it would have been petty in the extreme I beg your pardon. Above all, she felt that it would have been petty in the extreme to voice her annoyance right now.
そうね。注意するのは伸ばしてくる腕
You're
だけ
right. The extending arm is the only thing I have to worry about, so it's not that tough after all. This time it was not false bravado. Such an enemy would normally be a breeze for Aoko Aozaki. But her shameful negligence had led to the disruption of her magic circuits, making her even less formidable than her enemy. At this point, Aoko had no way of attacking. The only option left to her was to wait for it to expend all of its magical energy, but its perpetual curse mechanism made that a non-starter. This game of tag would not end until one of them was dead. She realized that she was in the same position she had cornered Sojiro in earlier. She glanced at her right arm. She could not imagine how she had gotten into such a mess with her magical energy at more than half of its capacity. This had to be karma for having enjoyed toying with Sojiro earlier.
呆れた。いるところには
Maybe there is a god after all. She grumbled under her breath as she shifted her focus. She had the fuel for the fire, but not the igniter. And that killing machine would chase her until the end of time if need be. What she should do next was blindingly clear. She had to get back to normal.
青崎
ごめん、考え事してた。
Sorry, I was thinking.
確か。
Maybe that could...
よし、合ってる。
Okay, Shizuki, I've got it.
しずきくん、そこに横道あるのわかる？
You see that side passage over there?
Oh.
Aoko pointed, but he could see nothing but the walls of the corridor. For one thing, the floor had nothing but left turns, and Aoko was pointing to the right.
2階は中心まで行くと
At the center of the second floor is a stairway down to the first floor,
使えないの。
which I destroyed earlier so you couldn't use it.
けど、
But there's another path that leads to the right.
よく見れば右に曲がる通路もあるのよ。
But there's another path that leads to the right, like this place is taunting you by design. It's a secret shortcut that only the hardcore fans know about.
あとは注意して探せば。
If you search carefully, you can find a way to the stairs down to the first floor.
一人で
Now, do as I say and go on without me. Aoko turned her back to Sojiro and started walking. Walking in the opposite direction of the escape route, and down the long corridor toward the puppet in pursuit.
あいつは無差別だから。
That thing will kill anything it sees, so I have to destroy it here and now.
魔術師は
It's okay for two mages to fight each other, but dragging normal people into the conflict is strictly forbidden. I'm the target, so this is the best outcome for everyone, don't you think? If Aoko won, the puppet would be destroyed. If Aoko lost, its objective would be complete, and it would shut down. Either way, them going their separate ways would mean Sojiro survived. This is what Aoko meant. Though she explained it as if the events were happening to two totally different people. If you're lucky enough, you'll make it back to the gate in one piece. So, see you tomorrow then. Even Sojiro could tell she was just trying to act tough. But she had already disappeared around the corner by the time he thought to stop her. Well then. Mentally, Aoko bemoaned the disaster she was in. Excuse me. The quality of this puppet was on a completely different level compared to the one from the park 2 days ago. An auto-incanting perpetual motion machine was a rarity in and of itself, but this puppet was also equipped for battle with its extending arms and Gondor-projecting crystalline eyes. It was a first-class production that, if put on the market, would sell for hundreds of millions of yen. Although, that was only when factoring in its value as an antique. For the purposes of combat, it would have made more sense to mobilize a significantly less expensive familiar. To use such a precious commodity as a tool for murder marked this puppet's master as a completely different breed of crazy from the enemies she had faced up until now.
Vivo in som solitare putoris inferis. Ictius meus obitus dies, et meus nativus dies. Theobeam.
来たわね。
Here it comes. A sound of crackling music box filled the air. The automata, animated by its own curses, approached. The correct nomenclature is automaton, because automata is plural. Automaton is singular for either a male presenting or female presenting or non, would it be considered non-binary or non, I suppose non-binary robot. Android would be appropriate. Near a tomato indeed. Near a tomaton, yeah, in fact, is my point. Near a tomaton. Near a ton of tomatoes. Near a tomato ton. Anyway. The corridor measured approximately 30 feet in length. Aoko lay in wait around a corner further down the hall, anticipating the puppet's appearance. This was not to buy Sojiro time to escape. Far from it. Aoko had concluded that she couldn't make a break for it under the current circumstances. Even if she did try to escape, and by some miracle made it out of the House of Mirrors, that was as far as she would go. Outside, with no cover, Aoko would quickly be overtaken and skewered from behind. As long as her magecraft was disabled, escape was impossible. Instead, she chose to force the enemy back. Her situation was not the most favorable, but neither was the puppet's. Though this narrow hall gave Aoko no place to run, it in turn prevented the puppet from reaching full speed. That was the weak point of this machine. Automata of its era had a tendency to struggle with the minute changes in speed. See, that would be the correct use of automata, because it's referring to more than one automaton.
セット。
Set. She flowed energy into her shorted circuits. Her blood flow and magical energy supply were unstable. It would be difficult to construct a formula in this state. All she could do was harden her right arm by imbuing it with as much magical energy as she could. Doing so turned her arm into an improvised weapon like a hammer or a bat. Assuming she could manage to get into close combat range, this was the best she could do. All she needed now was a plan of attack. The question wasn't what weapon to use, but how to use the weapon she had. The simplest way would be to use the mirror's reflections to hide and then rush the puppet from its blind spot, except for one major problem. Yes, reinforcement, just like Shiro does, exactly. Except he does it on pipes and posters and chair legs. She's just doing it on her arm because she's a badass. She's gonna punch the shit out of that robot. It did not have a sense of sight in the first place. The puppet's view of the world around it did not stem from visual feedback, but from mapping the topography of its surroundings. In theory, it was the same as a bat's echolocation. The environment could be measured based on the emissions and return of high-frequency sound waves. Those chants served as sensor pulses. As far as the puppet was concerned, the mirrors were no better than transparent panes, making even the thought of an ambush laughable. That's awesome. You use echolocation to navigate? That's cool. I wish I could do that.
近づけば近づくほど よりリアルに
The closer it gets, the more it's able to sense me. I'd really rather fight it at a distance, but if it's shooting Gondor, it's probably got at least a fin shot up its sleeve too. Gondor was Scandinavian in origin, and considering its simplicity, highly versatile. It was most effective at impairing a target's health by pointing a finger. As a single-action magecraft, it was limited to only causing illness, but there was a secret technique said to be the greatest mastery of the Gondor shot. The fin shot. It could do more than cause simple illness. It was a deadly curse that could stop the heart. The wound on her back set her nerves on fire. An unarmed girl and a deadly automaton. See, there you go. It did it right that time. It was clear that she was the one destined for death. She considered her slim chances of survival when a vision sent chills down her spine. Quietly, using everything she could to clamp down on the feeling, Aoko faced her all-too-familiar illusion. She clenched her teeth to keep them from making a deafening clatter. But there, the sensation of fingers crawling up her neck. Behind her, the specter stared and laughed. This alone made Aoko want to bolt. On top of it all, when Aoko tried to mentally simulate the coming fight, she estimated a 2 in 10 chance of dying in the first 5 seconds. So there's a double comma over there if you didn't. It's weird. 20%. At times, her predictions were harsher than reality. If Aoko fought the puppet 10 times, she would die twice. She could not stop herself from visualizing her own corpse. She imagined herself collapsing, crumpling under the puppet's curse. Her eyeballs swollen like a blowfish, blood and other fluids oozing from every bodily orifice. 1 in 5, 1 in 5, 1 in 5. A 1 in 10 chance of death was bad enough, but 1 in 5, it drove her crazy. But Aoko forced down her heart as it tried to escape from her mouth. Taking in a deep breath, she peered at her own reflection. She thought back to that white night half a year ago. This, she decided, was nothing to compare to that. 6 months ago, at the Kuonji estate, the Hound of White Roses, the Vandersnatch that appeared from within the thick fog, had killed Aoko 100 times out of 10.
Mehr anima emrutaris, otem eftura negata sunt. Manes sum, animam definire ambiguum est.
A dark curse shattered Aoko's daydream. It was only 30 feet away. The puppet rounded the corner. Either side stood in the shadows, their forms indistinct. The puppet gave no warning. Without preamble, it swiftly fired a Gondor barrage. Just as Aoko planned, the curses fizzled out as they hit her mist-like barrier of magical energy. The protection would only last a few seconds, giving her just enough time to... Come on. Its stretchable spear sprang toward Aoko's face.
Bingo!
The lethal weapon grazed her cheek. All her experience analyzing puppet attack patterns gave her the wherewithal to evade the attack by a hair's breadth. It was one thing if a puppeteer were pulling the strings, but autonomous dolls had their limitations. Aoko had bet everything on this killing machine's following a predefined template. The puppet would use a given attack for a given range, and she could adjust her tactics to that.
いけるこのまま
Now's my chance. Before its arm had a chance to fully retract, she charged the puppet. It was a risky gamble, but her overall chances were slim to begin with. The scales tipped in her favor. If her predictions were correct, there were 2 ways she would die. One was from a fin shot fired at that range. And the other was if the puppet's attack pattern was beyond her ability to foresee. An instantaneous mass transfer, otherwise known as mass displacement. Immediately after Aoko dodged the puppet's arm, something smashed into her abdomen. The head-on collision from its shoulder felt like a rocket. But where did the ability to propel itself come from? Puppets like this were not built to have the ability to jet around like that. Doing everything in her power to stay conscious in spite of the pain, Aoko could just make out what had happened. It wasn't propelled, it was pulled. Yes, the puppet's arm had not returned to its body. It was lodged in the wall and reeled itself in from the other direction. It can do that? Swallowing her surprise, she hastily pulled herself back up. Her abdomen, specifically her diaphragm, had been dealt a significant blow. The attack left her disoriented. Thankfully, the puppet was surprisingly lightweight. Her bones and organs were intact, and she sustained no life-threatening damage. She was having a hard time breathing, however. She was shaken, though she managed to keep her calm. In another 2 seconds, she'd be back on her feet. No, that was 2 seconds too long. She told herself to calm down, that she was already calm, that she had only briefly lost her bearings. She was fine. She could recover her breath and her vision later, if only her body would move. Above her, Aoko could hear the warped noise of a powerful force. Come on, legs, move. We've got to... get to... where? She could once more feel the touch of death. Grant us salvation. Grant us salvation. Grant us salvation. The puppet was so close that Aoko could reach out and touch it. That also meant that it could reach out and kill Aoko. I need to get my right arm into its blind spot. By intuition alone, Aoko rolled over to the puppet's right flank. Its arm was still embedded in the wall. From here, it could not attack. She had made the right decision, and her dizziness faded. Cast off righteousness. Lay piety to rest. We beasts are meant to consume each other. Life is but a decoration. Throw away your intellect. Pain powers the mind. Aoko pulled herself back up. It was her turn. What? It was only an instant. Within this labyrinth of mirrors, she saw an image of herself. We die. A blinding, brilliant light flashed. Lacerations appeared across the walls. At the last moment, Aoko managed to thicken the magical energy running through her veins into a primitive form of magecraft resistance. It just barely saved her life from what must have been the puppet's ace in the hole. Why, you... The puppet bore a striking resemblance to Aoko. This powerful curse was not satisfied with stopping Aoko's heart, but destroying her entire being. Aoko did not even have the time to be shocked. This was her chance for a counterattack. The puppet's balance was unsteady, its right arm still embedded in the wall. Aoko prepared to give its defenseless body a strong kick, but her knees buckled, and she collapsed into a heap on the floor. In slumber I live, in dirt I rot alone. Today is the day I died and was born. I come to you. A sudden nausea and lightheadedness overcame Aoko. Her body temperature began to rapidly lower. This whole time, it was spreading its curses the whole time. She noticed too late. The puppet's curses circled in the hall. The cursed chant that the puppet had used as a source of power doubled as a defense mechanism, crippling those who drew near with illness. She bore the full brunt the entire time she was in close proximity to it. Although Aoko had magic circuits, she was succumbing just as Sojiro had. Languidly, she forced her deteriorating body to jump back. I'm not done yet. With all the energy she could muster, she forced her way past the exhaustion caused by the curse. However, Aoko's blood pressure took a steep nosedive, not from the curse-induced anemia, but from what appeared in front of her. They stood in perfect harmony. In front of Aoko was the automaton that shared her face, its left arm held out like an arrow. The deadly weapon shot forward and honed in on her heart. Then, a moment before it made contact. Watch out. The moment she heard that fearless voice, completely out of place in this storm of violence, Aoko's body was pulled forcefully to one side. Once again, the extending arm cut through empty air. While the puppet quickly retracted its left arm, Sojiro took the brief opportunity to take Aoko by the hand and flee at full speed. Sojiro ran through the corridor as fast as he could, only stopping when he had put enough distance between them and the puppet. I was thinking, and though he had saved her, she looked angry rather than grateful. This did not keep Sojiro from saying his piece. Tomorrow's going to be a really busy day for me, so... In other words, let's finish this today. Why didn't she use her hardened arm to break off one? Because the curses that the puppet was muttering were actually polluting the air around her. So, like, the instant she came into range, she was debilitated. Because she lied to Sojiro earlier. It's not that the Ganjers don't affect her, it's that they affect her less. For him, he has no magic circuits, so he would instantly be stricken with illness or maybe even death. But for her, she has some resistance to it, but not an immunity. So once she was within range, she fell victim to it and was unable to counterattack. At least unable to counterattack fast enough. A rather awkward proposal. Aoko remained silent. She was also rather angry. Not that she could not figure out what made him tick, nor because he'd returned after escaping. Not even because he was spouting his typically airheaded lines. It was, she supposed, that instant. The fact that when he grabbed her hand, her mind had gone completely blank. Aoko found it unforgivable. Which beckoned the response. Are you insane? In the heat of the moment, she blurted it before she could stop herself. Or maybe you've got a death wish. Don't you realize that either of us could kill you with a snap of a finger? At the very least, I don't owe you a damn thing. Saving my life doesn't change a thing between us. Sojiro nodded, clearly unperturbed. Don't worry, Aozaki. If tonight taught me anything, it's that you're more ruthless than that. She found herself slightly offended. But I think you need to get one thing straight. That thing isn't just trying to kill you. I think it's trying to kill me as well. She was having none of it. Her eyes shot daggers his way. And before you chew me out, you need to know something. Do you remember the first floor entrance at the end of that long corridor? Well, it's blocked. I tried my best to find a way out, but no luck. There was no choice but to turn right back. Aoko's eyes widened ever so slightly in amazement. She felt admiration rather than shock that her enemy would go to such lengths. And besides, it was hostile to me too earlier. I could tell by how it was glaring at me. Well, it happened so fast that I didn't really get a good look at it, but it was really unsettling. You should be careful. That thing, she sure has a terrifying face. Gee, thanks. You bet. I mean, I can't pretend like this isn't happening to me. Whichever of you wins, I'm a dead man either way, right? I can't argue with that. If it's willing to go as far as to seal off the entrance, then it'd probably kill any witnesses as well. At least that's what I'd do. Right? I don't want her to be the one who kills me. Wait, what? His words were decisive. As Aoko looked up at him, she could swear he was trying to encourage her. It was then that she realized. Sojiro was looking even worse than before. Hey, are you okay? Well, better than if I'd drunk an entire bottle of soy sauce. He tried to make light of the situation, but his forehead was clearly drenched in sweat. Right, it's because he was close to the puppet just now. How could he possibly be able to withstand a curse that made even Aoko nauseous? She bit her lip, annoyed at herself for not noticing this earlier. Sojiro was such an airhead that she hadn't even paused to consider his plight. Why didn't you consider trying to hide down in the basement? That would have been the safest bet, wouldn't it? She really could not understand him at all. You should really take your own advice sometimes, Aozaki. But hey, this is no time to be chatting. She could catch up at any moment. He turned to look down the corridor. The crackling sound of a music box could be heard creeping forth from the darkness. I was thinking about this while I was on the first floor earlier. If it kills you, I'm next. That's why we should deal with it first. What are you getting at? She asked a question to which she already knew the answer. She did it to put him to the test. If he wavered even a little, she would have killed him where he stood. My proposal is if I agree to help you kill that thing, will you let me go? I thought I'd made it clear that helping me wasn't going to change my mind. And besides, what do you think you're going to do to it anyway? Oh, that's your end of the bargain, Aozaki. This is your area of expertise, right? The commander who had the overall picture was responsible for delegating roles to their teammates. It was futile to depend on someone who was unable to grasp the situation or evaluate the enemy's strength. Sojiro was proud to share that he knew this. He spoke the truth. Aoko was the only one who knew both Sojiro and the automaton. That was why he pointed out that following her orders to the best of his ability was the only thing he could do. It may have seemed as though Sojiro had surrendered his capacity for self-thought, but in accepting that he was helpless, he was, in fact, giving Aoko his complete trust. Fine then, so you'll do exactly what I tell you to do.
100%従うってこと？
I will.
それに
And just so you know, I'm not doing this out of a sense of obligation or anything.
一人だと分が悪いから
It's just obvious that neither of us had a chance on our own.
善意でも好意
This
でもない
isn't goodwill or
取
kindness,
引って
it's
言われ
a
たこういうの
transaction. His eyes sparkled as if this were bartering in its truest form.
まったく。
Oh my god. This child must have learned that from Tobimaru, Aoko thought. Though she refused to let him see it, she smiled inwardly. Sure, he had gotten the best of her just now, but there were times when defeat was not the worst outcome in the world.
労働と報酬ってわけね。
Honest pay for honest work. Makes sense.
Mm.
And I hate to admit it, but... She relaxed her shoulders and sighed. Her face cracked into a wicked grin, as if her fears had suddenly washed away.
それ、結構
Your plan
私の
is
子なの
just my style. Aoko repaid Sojiro's trust in equal measure.
結構きついかもね。
Just so you know, this is going to be pretty tough for you. Aoko warned Sojiro, moving as fast as she could without her footfalls causing the din of noise. Sojiro remained near the center of the spiral maze on the second floor.
実を言うと、もう
I'll
一
let
つ
you in
用
on
意
the
してお
secret.
いた仕掛けがあるの
I have another trap up my sleeve.
自分でもやりすぎだって
I
呆れ
think I
たも
might
んだ
have
けど
gone overboard with this one, but when you didn't show up on time, I just couldn't help myself.
ちょっと
A trap?
仕掛けっ
For me?
て俺用の
Sojiro tilted his head like a squirrel as Aoko freely discussed the final ace up her sleeve.
地下の柱に着火型の
I engraved an ignition formula to the support pillars in the basement.
中心の
If
柱
I
に
ignite the central pillar, it will start a chain reaction that will ignite the rest.
起動するジャミングを食らう前に
I
作った
made
も
it
のだ
before
から
that thing started jamming me, so if I infuse it with a bit of magical energy, it'll go boom. Sojiro was a little unsettled by how unclear that last bit was.
青崎
Aozaki, could you, clarify?
できるだけ明確に
I want to know how much you were going to blow me up.
白状してくれ
Please be honest.
あと
Also, did I make a mistake agreeing to team up with you?
いやその
Don't be silly. It was just an insurance policy, yeah.
追いかけっこの途中で
I just thought if I lost sight of you at any point, I could blow the whole building and you with it. It's a lovely demonstration there. It was her policy to be thorough to a fault, after all. She laughed, embarrassed to hear herself say it aloud.
いくらなんでも徹底しす
Don't
ぎ
you
て
think
る
that's overkill? Faced with Aoko's cruelty, Sojiro forgot about the situation at hand and protested from the bottom of his heart.
何をいいじゃない
Stop
このおかげ
complaining.
でなんとかなりそうなんだ
At
から
least now we have a way to fight back. She shot back. Aoko dashed down the corridor, mumbling things that probably would have sent Sojiro panicking if he heard them. The strategy was simple. Aoko would use the escape route to the right and avoid the puppet while making her way down to the basement. Upon reaching the central pillar, she would infuse the formula she had prepared with magical energy and escape. Once ignited, it would take about a minute for the chain reaction to spread throughout the whole house of mirrors, and another minute for the building to collapse. She would be cutting it a little close, but because she'd committed the maze to memory, she was sure she could make it out on time. Aoko assumed that the chain reaction caused by the pillar would clear the barrier the puppet had placed at the entrance. And even if it was strong enough to withstand the blast, it would not be able to stay standing once the foundations buckled. Sojiro's escape was assured as long as the formula in the basement was activated. Next came the most important part. The automaton was at a disadvantage in the obstacle-laden house of mirrors and was unable to move at full speed. If it was near the center of the second floor when the building collapsed, it would be caught up and crushed by it. So the problem was keeping the puppet on the second floor until Aoko could make it down the basement.
当てにしたからね、しずきくん。
I'm counting on you,
せ
Shizuki.
めて3分ぐらいは。
I just need you to occupy it for 3 minutes. Ideally, he would be able to keep it busy until she could activate the formula. If that failed to work, him luring it down to the first floor would be the next best thing. She understood perfectly well the danger she was putting Sojiro in, but his lucky streak and running speed were nothing to scoff at.
ただ逃げるだけなら。
As long as all he has to do is run, then
とんでもない
maybe,
ことをしてくれた
just maybe,
あいつ。
just maybe he can actually pull this off. Aoko made her way through the hidden passage of the maze, her hopes pinned on Sojiro. Meanwhile, well out of earshot, Sojiro was readying himself for another desperate chase. He calmed his beating heart using a method of his own making. What mattered most was that he remained calm. The plan was simple enough, and Aoko's orders were succinct and easy to understand.
10メートルぐらいの距離を保って
Keep a distance of around 30 feet and weave through the corridors as slowly as you can 3 or 4 times.
横道は鏡のつなぎ目
Count the mirrors as you move to locate the hidden passages. From here, they are on the 6th, 3rd, 7th, and 2nd mirrors, counterclockwise. Use those and you should be relatively safe. It was essentially a looping marathon. As long as Sojiro kept just enough distance from the puppet's extended arm to allow her to track him, she could continue to chase him indefinitely. Simple though the task was, Sojiro was putting his life on the line as bait. And then there was the final order, to run as fast as he could to the exit when the building began to sway.
結構じゃなくて
This is more than just a little tough.
これは
He nervously stuck his head out from around the corner. He could hear the sound of the music box from the other side of the corridor. First, he had to make eye contact with it, then head through the shortcut on the right and begin their game of tag. He spotted it and braced himself. Closer, closer. Fearing that her arm could fly at him at any moment, he went over Aoko's instructions in his head.
あれ
Wait. However, he could not quite remember which pane led to the first hidden passage. The 3rd, the 6th, the 9th? No. He was sure that was mistaken. He was confident he had it memorized moments ago, but his nerves have gotten the best of him, and his head was now spinning. Then, Sojiro realized that the sound of his pursuer was beginning to grow distant, and at an incredible speed. Beginning to grow.
何
Beginning to grow closer, I believe, was the intended effect. And that, what's it doing now? The unusual silhouette of the puppet astonished him. Before it had taken the form of a beautiful girl, but now it made a bizarre transformation, and returned to the first floor to pursue her primary target.
いやそれは
Oh, this isn't the plan. Sojiro was no longer sure what to do. Before he'd even had time to mourn his failure, the puppet had vanished out of sight. I'll help, so let me go. Or so he had said, but now he could not follow through. There's apparently a ufotable film adaptation in the works, announced December of 2021. Announced December of 2021. I remember seeing a trailer for it recently, or seeing people talking about a trailer for it recently. I hadn't actually looked at it myself. But yeah, that's pretty exciting and kind of apt, I suppose. But yeah, looking forward to more ufotable Type Moon adaptations. They're very good.
さて自分はこれからどうしよう
So, what am I supposed to do now? Alone, he tilted his head in frustration. He spoke into the darkness as if Aoko would be there to answer him. Meanwhile, downstairs, as soon as she arrived on the first floor, Aoko understood what had transpired above her. She did not even have to strain her ears to hear the puppet. Even during its heyday, this attraction had never made sounds like the ones she heard coming toward her now. It was the sound of despair, as if a horde of monstrous hedgehogs were scraping their way past the mirrors in her direction. That ditz. 3 minutes? He couldn't even last 10 seconds. There's a joke here I hope I don't have to make. Rather than buying her time, Sojiro had instead stolen hers. He had one job, to run away, that was all. She cursed him under her breath. Multiple footsteps. So it switched from bipedal to multi-leg firm. The echoes made it sound like dozens of feet were approaching. Aoko's mind conjured an image of a giant six-legged spider tearing its way down the corridor. It was little wonder that it was so much faster than before. Its perception of its surroundings through echolocation was of particular use in the dark. Compared to sight-dependent humans, this automaton was far better equipped to navigate its way through the labyrinth of mirrors. If it could not keep pace earlier, that had been because its bipedal form made it less maneuverable. Now the stability provided by multiple legs gave it a speed that far exceeded that of any human. What now? What now? Her thoughts spun out as she tried to come up with a plan B. All she knew for sure was that this was a pivotal moment. If she continued standing still, she had seconds left at most. Even in her current state, she knew she could easily neutralize the bounded field blocking the entrance without casting a spell. All she had to do was feed a little of her own energy into it. Aoko could sprint with all her might for a little more than 3 minutes. The puppet had far more stamina than she did. She could only come up with 3 options. The first was to escape through the exit in front of her. The second was to hide somewhere on the more complicated first floor. And the third was to run into the basement and be stuck like a rat in a trap. Well, that's obvious enough. She made her decision with zero hesitation, moving her stiff legs again with determined strength. The oncoming storm was almost upon her. Her resolve firm, she turned and ran, descending into the darkness. No matter what, a finale should be glorious. This would be the Mirror Castle's final scene. 2 humans and a puppet. A young sorceress ran toward the subterranean heart of the castle, while an autonomous antique chased its prey into the depths of a demonic dungeon. A minute later, a faint blue charge would ripple through the castle. This was the main pillar in the deepest depths of the basement. Though not critical to the castle's structure, the pillar was a visible symbol of it. The girl concentrated her magical energy into a fist and thrust it at the pillar. This was the blow that would bring down the castle. She imagined the destruction as she threw the punch, and that scene blossomed into reality seconds later. It was simple ignition magecraft, meant to release the condensed magical energy engraved into the 4 pillars at the corners of the structure. Using electricity as a switch meant virtually instantaneous activation. It happened swiftly and elegantly. A hammer of destruction descended upon the Castle of Dreams that had stubbornly resisted its fate for 2 years. It was almost a joyous sound, and so the lifeless and abandoned Castle of Mirrors set the stage for its final and most spectacular performance. Aoko's magical energy became an electrical charge that activated the magecraft formula engraved into the pillar. The chain reaction would lead to the castle's destruction.
ご苦労様。
You served your purpose,
でも
but it must have been rough.
くたびれてたのね。
Looks like you're going to collapse any time
じゃあ
now.
1分持つかどうか。
The plaza in the center of the basement. Aoko tried to steady her breathing while rotating her magic crest at full speed. She wreathed her arms in blue light, fully aware that she could no longer activate another formula. Her labored breathing refused to settle. She stood at the center of the basement. Without being spotted even once, she had managed to make it all the way to the central pillar. It was a 100-meter dash in 13 seconds flat, undoubtedly a new personal best. She spurred on her weakened heart, knowing full well the fate that awaited her.
入れば追ってくる。地下に
It can't help but follow me, and once down here, there'll be no escape.
当然よね。
I should have
最
expected
後ま
that.
で逃げ回ろうな。
It's too much to expect that I could keep up the chase forever. Hindsight was 20/20. The castle was only a minute away from collapsing completely. If they stayed here, they would both be crushed by the rubble. The puppet certainly did not care. With no life of its own, its sole concern was the elimination of its target, Aoko Aozaki. Indeed, the enemy had been willing to die from the start. She resented her own lack of resolve. It wasn't like her to tuck tail and run from an opponent that didn't fear death. In slumber I live, in dirt I rot. Today is the day I died and was born. Now I come to you.
そもそも自爆覚
It's
悟
always been on a suicide mission, huh?
六足歩行とフィンの位
It
置
doesn't have enough juice to power the six-legged form and the fin shots.
魔力補給じゃ
The
何もない
curses aren't recharging it fast enough. Such a perpetual motion device was only as good as its ability to regulate its energy consumption. Using so many functions at once meant it was burning through fuel quickly and losing the ability to process the curses that powered it. It was using up all of the functions it had been given to achieve its aim. This was the pride of a tool, if such things could have ego. Those endowed with sentience could never hope to understand. A beast born to do nothing but run would burn any human who faced its resolve.
ほんともったいない
It's a waste when you think about it.
こういう無茶をするの
I
は
thought my
私だけ
sister was the only one capable of something this reckless, but I guess I was wrong. But Aoko did not intend a sacrifice play here. She respected her adversary now, and she was done regretting her choices. There was no time to waste.
行くわよ
This is it.
ここできっ
This
たり
ends now. Aoko had every intention of paying it back double for what it had done to her. The energy Aoko had accumulated exploded out of her right leg. She aimed for a single thing, a head-on attack. The enemy responded with a lethal curse that reached for her heart like a set of talons. Humming with power, it meant to rend Aoko's heart and burn itself out in the process. As soon as she saw it, Aoko kicked the floor as hard as she could. Her long hair swirled through the air as she flipped aside. This lateral move almost sent her tumbling to the ground, but a quick swing of her arm allowed her to regain her balance. A shot grazed her arm, the curse scorching her left shoulder. She did not flinch. Aoko knew she could hold on as long as she continued to avoid a direct fin shot. Off balance and in pain, it took her half a second to recover. The moment she raised her head, she deflected the attack with a fistful of magical energy. Here it goes. If the puppet had a will of its own, its eyes would have popped right out of its sockets. It would have been floored, shocked at the strong will that allowed this girl to perform a series of moves like this. Aoko's response was instantaneous. While her power was not sufficient to completely redirect the arm's trajectory, it was just enough to deflect it harmlessly past her hair. It was all a mistake. I should have never been born. Atone for me. Atone for me. Atone for me. The chant became a curse that robbed Aoko of her vitality. Did it still have something left in the tank? Or was it actually indignant? Whatever the reason, Aoko was easily able to resist its weakened defensive maneuver. And her right leg, pulsing with magical energy, shot up into the puppet's chest from below. It was much lighter than Aoko anticipated. Or rather, she felt little resistance. An automaton's weight was determined by its internals, the size of its power source. Ironically, it was the superiority of its music box engine that would prove to be its downfall.
Venite, venite, venite. Meum sepulchrum venite.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to my grave. A stuttering curse. Having taken the full brunt of Aoko's kick, the puppet bounced from ceiling to floor, collapsing in a heap. Its internal construction had been warped by the impact, leaving the drum of the music box that powered the puppet warped as well. Take your design flaws up with your maker. A single dynamo would have been all you needed to... Wait, what the... Part of the ceiling came crashing down in front of Aoko, snapping her back to her senses. Did I really just take her out? She was so stunned by her own victory that she forgot the House of Mirrors had already begun to collapse. I've got to get out of here. No time for shit-talking. There was no time to relish in her victory or pity her opponent. Not unless she wanted to meet the same fate. As the situation stood, she found it hard to imagine getting out alive. Get a move on, Aoko. She clapped herself on the cheeks to motivate herself anew. This was her bounty for finishing their battle in a matter of seconds. Her breath ragged with excitement, Aoko ran for the exit. The collapse was intensifying by the second. Having lost its support pillars, the castle was buckling under its own weight. I think those are different cheeks. Out of my way! Escaping from the basement was proving to be no easy task. While she was tanking the shortest route possible through the maze, she was nearly crushed by a falling piece of the ceiling along the way. This was the second time, no, third, she had to deal with falling rubble along the way. She destroyed the debris on the stairs with magical bullets as she ran. The automaton's jamming had long since worn off. The earlier attack had damaged the vast majority of its functions. Aoko's breathing was heavy as she ran. Desperation sparked her brain into overdrive. The ceiling seemed to be collapsing in slow motion. Life seemed to flash before her very eyes. Each second stretched into 5. Her frayed nerves made it hard to tell the time. There was debris riddled throughout the stairway, forcing her to crawl up it. She emerged from the destroyed basement into the collapsing first floor. That the plaza was still traversable at all was a miracle in itself, and fortunately for her, the crucial path to the exit was still intact. I made it. The corridor to the entrance was still intact. The basement maze only extended as far as the plaza, so the entrance corridor wouldn't collapse. Only the ceiling would cave in, leaving the scaffolding surrounding it intact. She got herself this far by telling herself repeatedly that fate would decide whether or not she reached the plaza. Her gamble paid off. It was her lucky day. All she had to do was muster the last of her strength and keep moving forward until... She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Was it naivete? A sense of responsibility? She pushed aside the image that popped into her head and continued running down the corridor. We don't have the luxury of coordinating the timing with each other to pull this off. It's not the greatest plan in the world, but we both need to do our parts and get to the exit as quickly as possible. That was 5 minutes ago. At the time, Sojiro had nodded with trepidation, and Naoko had not bothered to ask herself why. What are you spacing out for? Just focus on running. This corridor was giving out too. If she were to look back, she was sure she would see the building collapsing in on her. She was also sure she had no time to waste on doing so. Her luck was fading fast as the building's structural integrity. It was a small miracle that she had escaped serious injury up to this point, and she could not afford even the slightest slip-up. An ankle sprain, loss of balance, or even a sneeze would be fatal. A simple pat on the back was enough to end it. So naturally... Oh. There it was, clear as day. From the detritus of the stairway, death had arisen to take her down with it. A corpse that had crawled its way up from the depths of hell itself. It was still operational. And it was still armed with curses. It had crawled after her, watching as Aoko desperately tried to save herself. The puppet's arm shot forward. While Aoko did not turn to meet it, she could see its reflection in the mirrors. Extend, extend, extend. This time she could not dodge it. There was absolutely nothing she could do. The puppet with her face sang. I invite you to die a muddy death. Become as whispering dust. Gouge out your heart. Death be upon you. For a moment she could not believe her eyes. It was the last thing she'd expected to see. Don't know when to give up, do you? A fierce expression adorned the face of the boy who had been waiting in the plaza as he smashed the puppet's outstretched arm. Anger really did not suit him at all. His weapon of choice was a fire extinguisher. He must have searched the maze for something to use as a weapon. No, never mind that. It was too crazy to contemplate. But had he stayed behind for her? Shizuki! Aoko stopped the feet she had sworn would never stop moving and extended a hand out to him. That's enough, leave it, we have to go! Sojiro tossed the fire extinguisher aside and took off running. Pieces of the ceiling continued to collapse like dominoes. They kept moving with dust and dirt following in their wake. Their shadows raced through the collapsing corridor with all their strength. The castle was in the throes of death. With a massive crash and a cloud of dust, the final chapter of the fairy tale that had been Kitsyland came to an abrupt end. This duel to the death was over. For a moment, amidst their swirling emotions, any past enmity was forgotten. The two collapsed on the lawn and basked in strange solidarity. The ringing in their ears subsided before long. A tremor of such magnitude seemed impossible in an amusement park like this. As the sounds of destruction echoed across the park, Aoko addressed the individual at her side. Hey, you alive? Yeah. While the click of her tongue was adorable, the meaning behind it was anything but. Aozaki, what happened to that thing? What do you think? It was crushed to bits. Sojiro sighed, not wholly relieved by her frank response. His reason. Never mind that thing. You should be worrying about yourself. He wasn't out of the woods yet, after all. Aozaki, I'm guessing you were a bit of a bully as a kid. Maybe, but I don't get a kick out of seeing people suffer. Never mind that. Do you know the situation you're in right now? She sat up and smiled. Sojiro hung his head in shame, wondering why her kind tone and expression were so chilling. Please accept my sincerest apologies. Oh no, don't you even start. You know what our agreement was, and a deal is a deal. If you held up your end of the bargain, I'd let you go. Exactly. And that's why I'm apologizing. Sojiro made a show of avoiding her eyes. Like a pouting child. Aoko was taken aback by this sulky display. Perhaps he was angry at himself rather than her. He was not mad because she would not let him go. He was mad that he had not done his part. Aoko sighed for what seemed like the millionth time that day. She could not figure out what surprised her more, this unconditional kindness or her naive approval of it. So, are you ready? Of course not, but a promise is a promise. In the end, I failed to do my part. It was certainly the case that he failed to do any of the things she had expected of him. But just then, she glanced back at the collapsed house of mirrors. What had he done after failing so spectacularly? He had searched for the extinguisher so he could use it as a weapon, and waited patiently in the plaza as the maze collapsed all around him, just because he thought it was wrong to leave her behind. It was a foolish choice, and the exact opposite of her choice to run toward the exit without hesitation. I suppose I'll take it. She was satisfied, even as she was shocked at how naive she was being. It was true that he had saved her. She smiled inwardly, admiring, if only for a moment, the bravery he continued to show in the face of such extreme circumstances. You may have blown your chance, but you did make up for it after the fact. I'll keep my promise. With a nod, she pulled herself to her feet. But you'll pay back this favor someday. The girl tried to keep a straight face as she offered a hand to the boy still lying on the ground. You managed to help me in the end. So because of that, I'll let you off the hook. For tonight. She bashfully averted her gaze. Though her profile appeared different than it had in the past, it was clearly still the face of the vibrant girl he met the day he first arrived in town. What are you staring at? As if she had felt his eyes on her, she shot him a frowning glare. Oh, sorry. It's just, as crazy as it is to say it aloud, you really are a fair person, Aozaki. He took her outstretched hand. Feeling his weight as she pulled him up, she could not help but think that he was about the last person she wanted to hear that from. By the way, you said he'd left me off the hook for tonight. What about tomorrow? Well, we'll just have to see. She shrugged her shoulders, as if she was not sure herself. The response was so unlike her that it made Sojiro smile. Was it the solidarity of having escaped death together, or their fleeting camaraderie that made him do so? It might have been for this night only, but the air between them was kind and gentle. A lot had transpired, but the midwinter nightmare had come to an end. The pair had overcome many trials and tribulations, and could now leave the mirror realm in their wake. But before that... How selfish of you. And who, may I ask, said you could decide that, Aoko? It was the voice of a beautiful songbird and a merciless machine, all rolled into one. Her voice quivered as she spoke the name. The lady in black made her presence known. The night was not yet over. Her name was Alice Kuonji. She was a witch whose name struck fear into the heart of Aoko, an avatar of the night who would allow no witnesses. And on that hell of a cliffhanger, we end tonight's exciting episode of Mythos Mondays. I'll be honest, it has been kind of a Chivo pop, indeed. It's been kind of a oop. Alright, I might have to edit that toggle. It's been kind of not super engaging thus far. This episode, today's episode, definitely changed that, in my opinion. It was pretty bog standard visual novel school life introduction with a sprinkle of Type Moon that I'm familiar with. But like that whole sequence was really awesome, and not to mention action packed. It also took us 2.5 hours to get through that one chapter. So rather than starting a next one, even though we're close to my regular 3-hour mark anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and call it here, because if part 2 of that is anything close to what part one of that was, then we're gonna be here all night, and I can't do that. So, that being said, thank you guys for joining me. Let's find somebody to raid. We are pretty peak gaming hours right now. I don't know who's on and who's doing what. Let's check out. Actually, here's what we're gonna do. There we go. All right, I'm sending you guys off to see Aegis. Aegis, a VTuber I've seen on Twitter now and again. You have drop him a follow. He's playing Elden Ring right now, so yeah. I don't know. I don't know if it's a challenge run. I don't. You gotta come on, man. It's Elden Ring. How can we pass that up? I should maybe go back and play it again myself. It's been some time. Anyway, enjoy. I'm gonna go get some food, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for coming. DLC someday. DLC someday. This year, I hope. I'll definitely stream the DLC when it comes out. Absolutely stream the DLC when it comes out.